Dare part 6. So we were going to stop this on part 4, and now we're on part 6. Look at God. For the past 5 weeks, we've been learning about the heroes of faith in Hebrews 11, and we've obviously been going back to Genesis to see what these heroes are about. We saw with Noah and Enoch how they walked with God. It was a faith that they actually walked their journey with God for all of their years. And then we continue to see how Abraham had this willingness and this obedience to follow God. And last week we heard how Sarah, she actually was able to worship God, and she waited on God for this promise that He promised her. And today we're going to learn how to cultivate a new level of faith through the life of Joseph. So everybody say Joseph. Can I remind you that we're a church that doesn't watch the pastor? We agree, and we actually communicate with the pastor, because I'm just going to preach forever if you don't do that. It helps me keep to my time if you agree. Hebrews 11:22. By faith, Joseph, when his end was near, spoke about the exodus of the Israelites from Egypt and gave instructions concerning the burial of his bones. Now, when I read that in Hebrews 11, I'm going, why are they mentioning that? That doesn't seem very hero-like. It's like, by the end of his life, great. He told him what to do with his bones. What's so hero-like about this? If we actually look at his life, it's because he believed in what's to come. So he got to the end of his life and had this faith that carried him through, because he believed in what's to come. He believed that the Israelites would actually escape Egypt at some point. He believed that that would happen, and that God would be faithful to His chosen people. And so that's why it mentions that, because we need to know that the longevity, as we see in Paul's life, that's an example of faith. There's a longevity in Joseph going till the end of his life. He had faith, believing that God would help the Israelites out. And then he dies, and 400 years later, they then leave Egypt. It happened. But he had faith while he was still on earth. There was no fear, but only a commitment to God. So today I want to look at the life of Joseph, but not just the life of where he was about to die, but I want to look at the life of Joseph. I want to look at his faith while he was alive. And when I look at Joseph's life, it often reminds me of the steps of walking, the stages of walking. Anybody have kids here? Small or big? Hard to work with or back chatting? I don't know what season you're in. If you have kids, you know. Anybody ever seen videos where babies are learning how to walk? There's these stages. I Googled it because I don't know these things, but babies actually start walking between 10 and 18 months, apparently. And I have 2 kids, and I didn't know this. Before walking, babies will usually have been crawling. So let's picture it for a second. Babies would be crawling. I'm not going to crawl today. Babies would be crawling for a while, and then there will come a stage where babies get to this thing where I'm not going to crawl. They get to a point where they lift themselves up on things. And babies are like, and then they fall, and mom's like, ah! Dad's all like, you'll just suck it up, buttercup. So then babies get to a stage where they lift themselves up. Then babies get to the stage where they start wobbling. It's so cute. They look like penguins, you know. They just, and daddy is usually on the other side going, come. Mommy's going, go, baby, go. And there's always this encouragement when babies start walking. And then they get to the other side, and everybody celebrates, and it's on video, and woo! Have you all been there? Yeah, it's the stages of walking. But one thing I've realized with babies is once they try and pull themselves up and fall, they don't stay down. When they're wobbling around and fall, they get back up. I mean, it's even true of adults. When we walk and fall, we don't go, oh, poor me, my life is over. We get back up. When my daughter falls, and I'm saying my daughter because she's way more clumsy than my son, she falls all the time. She's always hurting herself. I'm like, goodness me, you've got the spirit of Roxy on your life. So she's always falling. And I see it with my daughter. She's in pain, but she gets back up. And then last week, just such a good, like my son did this just so I could preach on it. I love it. He didn't actually. He runs into the room to grab something. But while he's running out, he didn't know that his sister left a glass of water on the floor. His sister. So as he's running, he kicks the glass of water. Now you can picture this for a moment. He's going, oh my goodness, I don't like my sister right now. Anyway, he kicks the glass of water. The water goes all over the show. Guess what happens afterwards? There's no sign that says slippery floor. So he slips, falls on his backside, hits his head and his arm. And even in his pain, even in his frustration with his sister, even in all the emotions that he was feeling, and he was feeling the emotions in that fall, oh my goodness, it was hard to control the kid, but he got back up. He didn't quit walking because of what happened in that moment. In his pain, in his frustration, he got back up. And that's what we see in the life of Joseph. That each time something happens, he keeps walking. He doesn't quit. His positive response transforms every setback into a step forward. His life just shows us that, hey, I've got a setback right now, but this has got to be something that's going to step me forward. We see in the life of Joseph that he doesn't go, why me, God? Not once do we read him saying, why me, God? But better yet, we see in his life that he says, what shall I do now? All right, I find myself here, but what shall I do now? So today I want to preach a title called Faith Forward. Faith forward. In Genesis 37, we see Joseph is loved by his dad more than all the other brothers. I mean, if that doesn't put a skip in your step, if you're any siblings in the house, you know that when you love more than the other sibling, it feels good, right? Yeah, my sister always used to say that about my grandparents. Is your witbroodjie, your white bread, if that's the translation. I don't know why, but grandparents love me. But it makes you feel good. And then the other sibling maybe starts getting a little bit of jealousy, and we see this in Joseph. His siblings are like, what? And hatred starts developing so much to the point that they want to kill him. So they're like, we're going to kill our brother. He's there alone. Let's kill him. Yeah. One brother obviously is like, no, that's not a good idea, guys. So what they do is they sell him off to slavery, to some Midianites, and they're like, hey, yeah, take our brother. We'll go back and tell Dad he's dead, but you guys take him for slavery. So that's in Genesis 37. Then 39, we see Joseph is bought by Potiphar, who is one of Pharaoh's officials. He's super rich. He's such a good place. He's one of the main guards. He's one of the main officers. And he buys Joseph. Then in Genesis 39, verse 2 to 5, this is what we read. The Lord was, everybody say that word. The Lord was with, if you're Afrikaans, you said with Joseph. I'm half Afrikaans, so I'm allowed to. The Lord was with Joseph so that he prospered. And he lived in the house of his Egyptian master. When his master saw that the Lord was with him and that the Lord gave him success in everything he did, Joseph found favor in his eyes and became his attendant. Potiphar put him in charge of his household, and he entrusted to his care everything he owned. From the time he put him in charge of his household and all of that he owned, the Lord blessed the household of the Egyptian because of Joseph. The blessing of the Lord was on everything Potiphar had, both in the house and in the field, because the Lord was with Joseph. And then we see Potiphar's wife, woman. Like her, not you, her. She tries to seduce the guy. And then he says no, he runs and flees for his life, but because she's clever, she tells her husband, listen, he really wanted to assault me. And so he gets accused and falsely accused and thrown into prison. I mean, Joseph just got from slavery now to Potiphar's house. Potiphar's house kind of maybe felt good because it was like, yeah, you're putting me in charge of things. And now I'm getting thrown into prison. Genesis 39, 20 to 21. Joseph's master took him and put him in prison, the place where the king's prisoners were confined. But while Joseph was there in the prison, the Lord was with him. He showed him kindness and granted him favor in the eyes of the prison wardener. See, while he was in prison, Joseph showed integrity. He showed integrity. He showed godliness. And because he showed this, the prison guard at that stage puts him in charge of all the prisoners. I mean, this is incredible. You just went from being accused, thrown into prison, to being in charge of the prisoners. Joseph then interprets a dream of a cupbearer and a baker who the king didn't like and was like, you guys messed up, go to prison. And so there he is interpreting a dream. And because he interpreted a dream for them, fast forwarding the story, he gets to eventually 2 years later interpret a dream for the king, for Pharaoh. Joseph, by the way, in his interpretation, made sure that God received the credit. Can I make a side note? Can we maybe make sure that God gets the credit for our faith? That God gets the credit for he tells them, listen, I'm only able to interpret this because God has made it known to me. It's not me, it's God. And I know often we feel awkward about it, but sometimes it is really God, and you need to be like, this was God. He deserves the glory, the credit, the worth for what happened in my life. Genesis 41:39-40. Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, since God has made all this known to you, there is no one so discerning and wise as you. You shall be in charge of my palace, and all my people are to submit to your orders. Only with respect to the throne will I be greater than you. You know this story. This is like better than Sieve de Lan, which doesn't exist anymore. It's better than all the Netflix shows you can see. Joseph's life is just incredible. Joseph's brothers then come to Egypt because there's this famine, and they come to Egypt. Their dad sends them to come fetch corn, and Joseph goes, he's standing there, and they bow down to Joseph. They don't recognize that it's the brother they sold to slavery. And Joseph once told them years ago, you will one day bow down. All of you will bow down to me. And so we see this dream fulfilled in his life. They sold him, but God sent him. His brothers sold him, but God sent him. Church, Joseph went from favored to rejected, from son to slave, from honored to humiliated, and then from expelled to exalted. See, through his life, we see many trials and many adversities and many challenges and many pains, but we don't see a faith-filled man giving up. We see a man of faith that stands up, even if it's wobbly. He stood up and he pursued what God had for his life. He didn't ask the why question. He asked, what shall I do now? So maybe if you find yourself in a valley situation, your question should be, what shall I do now? Not why, God, not poor me. What shall I do now? Why should we get up? Why should we as a church faith forward? Well, number one, we saw it because God is with you. You and I cannot give up because God is with us. God is with you. I mean, perhaps you can identify with Joseph's life. You can identify with his hardships. He was betrayed. Maybe you've been betrayed. He was deserted by his family. Maybe your family once deserted you. He was exposed to sexual temptation and chose to go against it. I'm sure many men in this room have found that. He was punished for doing the right thing. Many of you are doing the right thing and feeling punished because society doesn't see it as right in this whole woke movement. He was imprisoned. Some of you have been imprisoned, not literally or literally. His positive response transformed each setback to a step forward. So how do we get this faith like Joseph? We need to acknowledge that God is with us. God is with you. He's with you in your rejection. He's with you in the pain. He's with you when you feel like this is prison for me. He's with you in the temptations that life throw at you. He's with you in the temptation when you feel like giving up. He's with you in your seemingly impossible situation. He's with you when you're doing the things right and nobody can see that you're doing the right thing and everybody's disagreeing with you. He is with you. He's with you when you're feeling alone and when you're feeling forgotten. He's with you when you're depressed or anxious. He's with you in all seasons of your life. He's with you in your doubt. He is with you. And we just need to acknowledge this, that when we find ourselves in this place of our lives, that He is with me. We're not going to be able to conquer anything with daring faith if we don't acknowledge that He's with us. If we don't see Him as a real God as He is. I think sometimes we blur the lines and think He's just telling us stories. That's why our Christmas, I'm advancing the year. Our Easter is all about going through the journey of what happened on the cross. It's not a story. We treat it like a story, but it's not a story. It's accumulated facts about the life of Jesus. And so we need to treat it like that. But He is with you. When you feel like quitting, He's with you. He's with you. Church, can I just challenge us to quit trying to fast forward the valley moment, but rather faith forward? Many of us get in the valley and are like, oh, I live in South Africa, blah, blah, blah. Oh, my life is falling apart, blah, blah, blah. Oh, my parents treated me like this. Oh, my colleague treats me like that. Life is just hectic. It's just terrible. I'm so busy. I'm so stressed. Can we get to a stage where we're not fast forwarding our lives through the valley experiences? Because as Ryan said in worship, God's developing us in those moments. God's doing a work within us, and He did a work within Joseph. God, You are with me. While we wait, what do we need to do? What shall I do? What shall I do faithfully, deliberately, and continually, as we heard last week? What is it that God, that You want me to do? See, Joseph moved forward because he knew God was with him. God was directing his steps. I want to remind us that what matters most is not so much the circumstance or the event that we're going through, but our response to it. What matters most is our response to what we're going through. And can our first response be, you are with me? This is scary, but you are with me. This valley makes no sense, but you are with me. I haven't seen the promise yet, but you are with me. He is with us. I love what Charles Spurgeon says about this. He says, the Lord was with Joseph nonetheless when he was cast into prison. He knew God was with him in prison, and therefore he did not sit down sullenly in his sorrow, but he bestirred himself to make the best of his afflicted condition. I just picture that as Joseph could have sat down and said, poor me. He could have sat down, I don't know if this is safe to sit on. He could have sat down in prison and just be like, this is not what I planned for my life. I know you had a promise for me, God, but I did not plan this. I don't even see how you've got a purpose in this. I don't understand what you're trying to do, but God, I'm quitting. I'm giving it up. I know you said you're with me, but I'm not seeing it right now. But no, he didn't sit down and weep and complain and cry about it. He said, God, what shall I do now? No matter where you find yourself, he is with you. In fact, his name is Emmanuel, God with us. That's one of his names that we can declare every time we say the name of Jesus. When we say Emmanuel, we're saying, God, you are with me. It's a declaration, a promise that we can stand on. Matthew 28:20 says, and behold, I am always with you to the end of the age. Not sometimes with you when you're acting okay. I am always with you. I am always with you. I am always with you. So why faith forward? Number one is because he is with us. But number two, because he has a purpose for your life. He has a purpose for you. David Guzik says, we often complain to God that he puts us in terrible or difficult places. Yet God's will is that we trust him to bless us and make us successful as he measures success wherever we are. So wherever you find yourself today, daring faith doesn't stay seated. Daring faith does not stay seated. Daring faith takes a stand in the midst of trials and troubles and tribulations. Daring faith says, God, I know you have a plan and a purpose with my life, so I'm not going to sit down, I'm not going to back down, I'm not going to get set back, but I'm going to step forward in what you have planned for my life, because I know that you have a plan and purpose to prosper me and not to harm me. God, what shall I do now? I know you have a purpose for my life. We quit so quickly when we could just be on the edge of what God has for us. Or maybe not. But can we keep pushing forward, saying, God, I'm going to faith forward. I'm going to faith forward. I'm going to faith forward because I know that you are with me and you have a plan and a purpose for my life. Our most important opportunities may come when we least expect them. Joseph's still sitting in prison. When next thing he gets pulled out of prison, out of this dungeon, and hoiked in front of the king. Now, he didn't know when or what is happening, but he was ready. He was ready for what God had planned for him. And this was to interpret a dream for the Pharaoh. So we don't know when our next breakthrough is coming. We don't know when the next door will open. We don't know when our next opportunity to move is coming, to move his kingdom forward is coming. But in the meantime, what shall I do now? Because I know you have a plan and a purpose for my life. Whatever your situation is right now, just see it as training for serving the kingdom. Training for serving the kingdom. I mean, Joseph maintained, he was like on the mountaintop, in the valley, he maintained his faith. He kept moving forward. He knew that God had a plan and purpose for his life. So he didn't let his brothers get in the way of that. He didn't let Potiphar's wife get in the way of that. He didn't let what prison get in the way. I mean, many of us, if we just went to prison now, we would let that get in the way. But he's like, no, I'm not going to let it get in the way. I'm going to faith forward because I know that God has a plan and a purpose for my life. But the biggest thing we can see with Joseph, above all else, is that he carried a conviction. He carried a conviction that God has a plan for me. My question this morning is, do you carry that conviction? Do you carry the conviction that God is with you always? Do you carry the conviction that God has a plan for your life? Not just mine, not just Tara, not just Stella, not just Pierre. God has a plan for your life. Do you carry that conviction? Because I believe it's this conviction that Joseph had that carried him through the hard times in the valley, because he knew God was with him and he knew that he had a conviction deep within him that God has a plan and a purpose. We won't faith forward if we don't step out of our comfort zone and carry a conviction that God has a plan for me. Then we get to the end of Genesis. So next week we're not preaching Genesis. Genesis 50 verse 20. This is Joseph's words. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good to accomplish what is now being done, the saving of many lives. I mean, we read something similar in Romans 8:28. We know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him and have been called according to his purpose. Can I remind you that Joseph never had Romans 8:28? He didn't have this verse that we have, but he did carry its truth. Sadly, many of us know the text, but we don't carry its truth. He knew the truth, but didn't have the text. We know the text, but we don't carry the truth of this text. That God will turn for good according to his purpose. Not your purpose, not my purpose, not our plans, not our purpose, but according to his purpose. So again, it's coming to a place where we're saying, God, we have daring faith to actually trust that you are with us, to trust that you're directing our lives even when we don't see it. I want to read you a story that I came across. There was an old minister who had a unique gift to minister to the distressed and discouraged. In his Bible, he carried an old bookmark woven of silk threads into a motto. The back of it, where the threads were knotted and tied, was a hopeless tangle. He would take the bookmark out and show the troubled person the side of the bookmark and ask them to make sense of it. This messed up side, he would show them it and say, make sense of this. And they never could. Then the pastor would turn it over, and on the front were white letters against a solid background saying, God is love. He then continued to explain, when events in our lives seem tangled and meaningless, it's because we can only see one side of the tapestry. Daring faith will take us trusting that God's got the whole picture. We can only see one side, but God's got your whole life, the eagle eye on everything that he's planned and purposed for your life. And though you can only see the mess and the chaos tangled up here, God can turn it over and turn for good what he intended for your life. But you got to trust, put your faith in him. I'm going to ask Isak to come up as I end with this commentary thought and go into communion. The reason I'm waiting is because Isak's got like magic hands. Just does something. This is what the commentary says. If Joseph's brothers never sold him to the Midianites, then Joseph would never have gone to Egypt. If Joseph never went to Egypt, he would never have been sold to Potiphar. If Joseph was never sold to Potiphar, Potiphar's wife would never have falsely accused him of rape. If Potiphar's wife never falsely accused Joseph of this assault, then Joseph would never have been put in prison. And if Joseph was never put in prison, he would have never met the baker and the butler of Pharaoh. If Joseph never met the baker and the butler of Pharaoh, he would never have interpreted their dreams. And if Joseph never interpreted their dreams, he would never have interpreted Pharaoh's dream. If Joseph never interpreted Pharaoh's dreams, he never would have become prime minister, second in charge to Pharaoh. If Joseph never became prime minister, he would never have wisely prepared for the terrible famine to come. If Joseph never wisely prepared for the famine, his family back in Canaan would have died in the famine. If Joseph's family back in Canaan had died, then Jesus the Messiah could not have come from a dead family. If the Messiah never came, then Jesus never would have been here. And if Jesus wouldn't be here, we would still be dead in our sin. All from a guy like Joseph, who said, I'm going to have daring faith to know that God is with me. God is on my side. He has a plan and a purpose for my life, and he didn't know what was to come. God always had a plan. He saw the big picture. He knew what was to come. But if he never listened, if he never kept faith, if he always fell down and stayed down, we would not have seen the story as it comes today. You and me being saved, being freed, being transformed.